So, hi, Lisa.
Hi, Melanie. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you too. You're joining us from your home in Charlottesville.
Yes,
Yeah, great. How are things?
things are really good. It's beautiful out today, and I'm very excited about the classes I'm teaching. I feel like fall is, I don't know, this very vibrant time. It's like we have summer, and I love summer. And so, but there's this different energy to it. And then it seems like everybody's checked out, and I'm checked out, going on vacation or doing different things. And then fall hits, and it's like suddenly we all wake up to the possibilities of the work ahead. And so I
I,
always love that.
I really think that that's kind of the nature of teaching too, right? Our year is we kind of have that cycle that begins every fall again. My husband's a teacher too, and we always feel like September is the beginning of our year, and so it does. It has that feel, and I think when you live in locations where the season shifts and you get kind of a shift in the air, it also kind of gives a shift in mood and routine too. So that's always nice. So I'm glad to hear things are good. You are currently doing some teaching, right?
Yeah, I am working with an incredible group of memoirists in a memoir in a year class, which will end in December. And so that class started in January, and I've been really amazed. My students have worked so hard on their memoirs, and they all came in to this particular class because it's an advanced class with 40% of their memoirs started.
Yeah.
And we set a goal of everyone would finish their drafts by the end of May, and they did.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they spent the summer being beta readers for each other, and then this fall we're working on revision.
Now, is this a group I had a chance to talk to?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That was the class that you came in as a guest presenter.
Yeah. What's it like for you to have a full year with a group of writers that way and to be that invested? Because a lot of us, when we teach, we either teach for a semester or we teach like a 6-week workshop or even, shorter than that. To have that kind of investment in a group of writers over the long haul and to see their work emerge, what is that like for you?
I think it's a huge commitment in time, both for me and for the writers. And yet it is a huge privilege to be able to work with someone and really see the growth that happens over the course of a year. Because as you know, as a memoirist yourself, it takes a long time to kind of figure out what story you're trying to tell and to get it on the page and then do the revision. And because I'm working with people in such a long-term fashion, I really get to see them blossom and grow. And I get an intimate sense of what their stories really are. And I absolutely love it.
Yeah, I bet. I imagine that it's a struggle for you to find balance between, I know for me with my teaching, it's a struggle to find balance between the work I have to do for my teaching and then my own writing. How do you kind of find that, or do you struggle with that at all?
I would be lying if I said I didn't struggle. Yeah, so it is a challenge. And I think, when you are a teacher, you are in a giving position. You are helping other writers, and it's really easy to expend all of your energy and forget that we all have kind of this limited energy bank account that we're working with, and that you have to find a way to kind of receive and deposit into that account. And for me, writing is the deposit.
Yes.
So I have to be really intentional about making time, scheduling it, and then also reminding myself that this is important.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to say, oh, teaching and students are important, because they are.
Right.
And then sometimes to kind of set aside your own priorities.
Yeah. So how do you kind of set that intentionality? What does that look like kind of in your writing practice? Do you write every day? Do you give yourself certain days of the week where you write, or does it shift?
It does shift a little bit. And that shifts because I feel like the number one rule is to be kind to yourself. And I think when you put too much pressure on yourself and on the work, then you end up doing things that are unkind, which usually looks like overworking. Because, one of the things about writing is that it can be very fulfilling, but it is also a form of work. So I write most days of the week. Sometimes on my heavy teaching days, I just say it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But I usually write in the morning, and I do that because then it's done.
Yeah.
And what I find is that if I try to write later in the day, which I sometimes do, there's this anxiety that I feel about needing to get something done that may or may not happen.
Yeah.
And where if it's done in the morning, I have this sense of completion and I can move on with my day and focus, knowing that I've already done the thing that fills me up.
Yeah.
When I actually write, the first thing that I do is meditate. So I do meditation before I write, and that's a way of centering myself.
Yeah.
And then I do the writing. And, if I'm writing really hard material, I try to limit the amount of time that I'm working on it, because it's really important to write about things that are both light and dark.
Yeah.
And because, again, it's a form of emotional work. And so you want to make sure that there's that balance. And so I will write for a period of time. And sometimes that looks like editing. It's not necessarily generating new material. And at the end, I say thank you. And a lot of times I do what Ernest Hemingway did, and I will write, or actually no, it's Andre Dubus the first. He'll write thank you at the end of his writing. And I do that same thing, because I do feel like whatever words end up on the page, whether it's 10 or 2,000, are truly a gift.
Yeah. That's great, because I think I should start doing that, because then I'll know that at least at the end of a writing session, I'll at least have 2 words that I've written on the page. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you, when you say, you write in the morning, do you set a certain amount of time aside, or do you have like a number of words that you're going for, or does it vary?
It somewhat varies on where I am in a writing project. Right now, I'm trying to get a draft done of my book. Yeah. So I set aside 3 hours in the morning to do my writing. Sometimes I notice that it can be very easy for things like email or other, things that are distracting my mind to get in the way of that. So I don't always get a full 3 hours, but I do set that time aside unless I'm teaching. Yeah. On teaching days, that doesn't happen. On teaching days, my goal is 15 minutes.
Okay, great.
So I set it, and that's what I tell my students, is that, a lot of times we think, oh my gosh, I have to put down 3 hours, or I'm failing somehow as a writer. But when you write in a pressured way and you only give yourself a short period of time, you are able to focus at a level that you don't necessarily focus with when you have a lot of time. Right. And you'd be surprised at what you can get done in those short bursts.
Well, and those kind of short bursts, I think, are really helpful for us too, to recognize that still counts. Mm-hmm. Just because we didn't sit at our desk for 7 hours doesn't mean that we didn't accomplish something, and I think it can be kind of, to choose those short increments too, can be really helpful to kind of our mindset and our sense of accomplishment too. So.
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that I found for myself this summer is I was working on my book in the beginning of a book, and beginnings are so hard. So hard. And, I was wrestling with something that happens to all memoirists, is how much backstory does the reader need to have? Where does it belong? How are you going to structure it? And so I was wrestling with all of these issues. And some days I came to the page very reluctantly. I'll be honest, I rewrote this beginning like 25 times this summer.
Yeah.
And, part of it I knew was because it's difficult to do this. But as I got towards the end of it, in the beginning is kind of this setup for the fact that my brother dies by suicide. And as I was getting to this next part, what I realized is that, that still hurts.
Right.
It's not traumatic to me anymore. I've worked through the trauma, and yet the grief is still there, and it's always going to be there. And what I really had to sit with and be kind with inside myself is the fact that sometimes we do that kind of spinning our wheels in the writing process around things that feel less emotionally challenging, right, as a way to try to protect ourselves.
Yeah. I am right there in, kind of in the process where I keep kind of bumping up against that space that I know is painful, and then it's so easy to reverse and say, well, I'm going to work on that other part again, and I keep kind of bumping up, and you realize like, you got to get there. You got to get in there at some point too, but it's hard. It's a hard process for sure. I know that you, we've talked about the fact that among just the challenges of finding time for writing, you have been suffering from chronic Lyme disease,
Mm-hmm.
which has created some health challenges for you. How do you kind of take care of yourself physically, and what kinds of challenges has that, kind of given to your writing? Because I think other people who are kind of in that same position, where it's not just the obstacle of the story, but kind of life gets in the way too, I'm sure would benefit from some of your insight and wisdom.
Yeah, health is such a huge part of the writing life that we don't necessarily think about. I contracted Lyme disease in 2012, and I spent about 4 years being incredibly sick. And I was doing a lot of writing at that time as well. And I truly believe that writing is part of what helped me heal. When I say heal, I mean I'm in remission. And, at one point, the trajectory of my health looked like this, like, oh, like here's baseline, right, of what I would like to be for healthy. And I would get close to this, and then, oh no, I would go way back down to the bottom and then come back up. Now it's still it's like this, the waves are much smaller. When I can experience a setback, it's less severe and shorter in duration. And yet that still happens.
Yeah.
And so what I know for myself is that when I experience a setback of symptoms, number one, I experience a lot of pain, physical pain in my body. And that makes it hard to sit at a desk and type because it's joint pain, and a lot of it ends up in my neck. The other thing is that when you have inflammation in the body, you often have inflammation in the brain. And so if I don't take care of myself, the inflammation will get in my brain, and that makes it hard to remember things, hard to concentrate, and it affects my cognitive abilities. And when that was going on at a really intense level, that was terrifying to me. I was terrified that this would be permanent and that I would just lose skills that I had, come to rely on my whole life. So anytime I begin to experience a setback, like, because I'm a trauma survivor, I tend towards extremes.
Yeah.
I tend to ignore pain, or I will want to live in a very intense way. Like I feel that gravitational pull all the time.
Yeah.
And yet in recovery, I've learned not to do that. And so, what will happen is that when I start to experience the pain, that part of my brain will be like, oh, you can ignore it. You can do a little bit more. You can, push harder. And yet what I remember very vividly what it was like to be very sick. And so I that other voice will say, like, do you really want to go there again? Do you need to learn that lesson? Because that's really what it is. It's a lesson in self-care.
Yeah.
And so I will say, no, I don't want to do that again. And so what that means is that I have to pull back. I have to learn how to say no to other things in my life. Sometimes that means saying no to the writing because I need to rest, or I need to exercise in a certain way, or do some other kinds of treatments that I have to do. And just really recognize that, there's this form of yoga called bhakti yoga, which is the yoga of stillness. And to recognize that sometimes in our writing lives, what we need is to be still. And then when we are still, things are still happening in the background. And to have faith that this is not wasted time.
Right.
And so that's what I have to do, is I have to affirm for myself that this is not wasted time.
Yeah. I know that mindfulness is a big part of your life, and kind of mindfulness practice is a big part of your life. Is that something that has emerged as part of kind of your recovery process, or is it something that's always been a part of your life that now is just more central? Or how did that kind of become so central in your life?
So I grew up in a Buddhist community in Appalachia. So
I know that. That's something new. I did not know.
Yeah. So when I was 8 years old, I had family members in Buffalo that were Buddhist, and then they introduced my mom to Buddhism, and there was a very, very small Buddhist community in Elmira and Horses, where I'm from. And so we joined that community, and my mom said, you have a choice. Do you want to become a Buddhist or not? And I really gravitated to many of the teachings of Buddhism. And so I grew up in an environment where we did chanting meditations. And so, sometimes as a kid, I would be in meetings where there would be chanting meditations for up to 2 hours.
Wow.
Yeah. And so, as a kid, that was really intense. And mostly what I thought about is like my feet falling asleep, or how long is this going to take? Or, there'd be like 3 minutes of like intention, and, and the rest of the time was on that, or like how incredible it can feel when your feet fall fully asleep and they don't even feel like your limbs. So that's kind of like the foundations. I grew up in the place where I had that training. And then, as I got older, I continued to gravitate towards that. And in 2005, I'd experienced a really bad car accident where I had been hit by a drunk driver. I tore all the muscles in my upper neck and back. And because I was in such extreme pain, I had to practice mindfulness in order to learn how to tolerate that pain and kind of relax my body, because one of the things that pain does is it causes you to go like this. And the more you do that, the more you hurt. So I did yoga meditation, and I've done yoga since that time. And so, my practice continued to evolve to learn mindfulness-based meditation. I took a class in 2013 on mindful writing and how to incorporate mindfulness into the writing process. And I feel like for me, that was just revolutionary to figure out how to kind of bring these two things together.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I think that, mindful practice creates kind of this openness of spirit, and I would say that is something that is so definitive of you, both in your writing and in your teaching. And I think that, it must make you very open to the work that's coming to you as well, and, I would imagine that anybody can benefit on some level from that kind of practice of just, creating a little bit more openness in both your mental state and physical state that would enable you to kind of be open to the possibilities in your writing too.
Oh, absolutely. I teach that to everyone. I feel like whether you're a writer or not, there's lots of studies that show that mindfulness makes a huge difference in someone's life. And what I would say specifically for writers is that, one, it does help you keep your heart open. And one of the meditations I do when the work gets really tough and it hurts is a labeling meditation that I learned from Kristen Neff, who has a book on self-compassion and a whole website dedicated to that, where she has tons of meditations. I got a chance to work with her through a class. And so this is just a labeling meditation, is that you put your hand over your heart and you say pain, 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 or whatever the emotional experience is. And there's something about doing that lessens it. Yeah. It lessens the pain and it makes things more tolerable. And part of that is because, pain and different kinds of emotional experiences are very limbic. They are in this very primordial part of the brain. And when you put language to it, you make that experience, it takes it into the cognition, into, this prefrontal cortex of your brain. So the logic kicks in and it lowers the intensity. And so that's, one way that it's helpful. The other way that it's helpful is it does open your heart into intuition, into, where the ideas come from, which many of the ideas come from the unconscious mind. We all think it comes from like right up here, but the unconscious is really the part of us that is most intelligent. Yeah. And when we meditate, we learn how to do that. And the other thing that happens when you meditate for a long period of time is that you begin to develop what's called the internal witness. So you have this dual sense of an experience where, part of you is experiencing it and another part is just kind of watching it happen without judgment, and kind of labeling the experience and giving it a sense of meaning, or kind of getting you to refrain from establishing a story that's unhelpful. And so, as we think about the work that memoirists do.
Oh my gosh, this is what always happens. I always have my phone ringing in the middle of an interview. It's the worst.
Of course.
Sorry.
Oh, no worries. That's just what happens in life. So what happens is that as memoirists, we are writing what happened, but we also have to write, what does it mean? That's the dual role we play. And when you develop that internal witness, in meditation practice, you also bring that to writing practice, which makes that a little bit easier.
That's great. Well, before we go, this is kind of a nice segue, kind of that open-heartedness. I know that you are also teaching an online class that just started this week, right? On forgiving the other people or characters that we're writing about. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I know that there's also the possibility of maybe people joining that class. You've got a couple of seats left that people might be able to jump into.
Yes. So the class is called Story Matters, Forgive Your Characters, Empower Yourself. And I truly believe that forgiveness is a way to empower yourself. And the way you empower yourself is by releasing the victim narrative that you have established around a situation. That doesn't mean that somebody didn't hurt you or do something that's not okay. It's just that, or that you don't need to have that for a certain period of time. It's just that when we hold on to that victim narrative for too long, what happens is that victimhood is a powerless state. And so when we write about it, we are writing from a powerless state and not being the heroes of our own journey. Okay. And so that's what I teach people how to do. And it's through kind of a systematic process that I've put together that incorporates the work of Desmond Tutu, Fred Luskin, Brene Brown, Tara Brach, and some other people who work in the field of forgiveness. Yeah. And so what we're doing is really delving into what does that look like, not just for ourselves, but how does it work with our stories?
Sure.
And so, the best place to be in your story process is pretty close to having a full draft. That way, you know what story you've already told yourself, and what you're doing is figuring out what is the deeper story that gets to those universal truths that make the story not just a mirror for you, but a mirror for the reader's soul.
Wow. So if people want to find out a little bit more about that class, where would they find? Maybe you want to give your website. Is that where they might find it listed?
Yes. So they can go to my website, lisacooperellison.com, and just look under classes, and that's where you'll see it.
Great. And do you want to give your Twitter handle as well?
Yes, my Twitter handle is @LisaEllison'sPen.
Okay, that's great. I like that handle. Well, Lisa, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing all of your insights, both in the interview, the written interview, and in this conversation. I think that people will really benefit from the practice that you've learned and are putting into practice in your own life, and helping others put into the practice as well. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Well, thank you. And I just have to say that it's such an honor, because you are one of my heroes, Melanie. Oh. And it feels so wonderful to be able to do this. So thank you.
Well, thank you. You're going to make me cry before we leave. We'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Lisa.